So, hello to everyone who is listening now and will be listening and watching later the video. Welcome to the Colloquium European Societies in the Digital Age. We are setting up that Colloquium is a project we set up with the EU Commission and the Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung, which is the Federal Agency for Civic Education. This is Gustav Stresemann Institute. Michael Munz, my colleague, is standing behind the camera, not in front, but behind the camera. Me, I'm Sabria David, Slow Media Institute. And one format of the colloquium where we create a transnational communication space and deal with the challenges of digital societies from a European angle. One of the formats is video sessions, as we have now. And today's topic is populism, destructive forces, negative visions, and counter-narratives. So I'm really happy and honored to have so interesting guests, and I'm so looking forward to our discussion. And we had already some little chats about technical constraints and the possibility of making conversations transnational. So we have as guests, I will present you first. This is Erika Meyers. We know each other from a friend who is pastor, and I really love the theological aspect also with populism. You also wrote a book on populism. Maybe you will introduce yourself in short, just a few sentences, so our guests know who you are.
Yeah, good afternoon. So my name is Erika Meyers. I'm working at the Protestant Theological University in the Netherlands, actually on 2 locations, in Amsterdam and in Groningen. I previously I worked as a journalist, and I did publish a book on populism. This one, Populism in Europe. It's a collection of articles, basically. So maybe for now, as a theologian, I work on in the department of practical theology, and especially on diaconal questions, which has to do with questions of power, of poverty, suffering in society. So that's maybe enough for now.
Mm. Okay, thank you, Erika. And the other guest is Bernard. So maybe we have to say that you are speaking from Amsterdam, from Netherlands.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
As we have a transnational discourse right now also, we have several bridges we all have to use. The first is the technique. So in case something goes wrong, just we apologize now, but we have to use this bridge. And also the English language is a bridge we have. Erika already mentioned maybe we have alternatives. We can talk about that later. So the other guest is in Paris. We have now, I'm sitting in Bonn, Germany. Erika is sitting in Amsterdam, Netherlands, and now we have Bernard Benhamou, who is speaking from Paris. I met Bernard Benhamou in the Bundesrat, the German Bundesrat, which is the Federal Council, where we have been invited to discuss fake news and hate speech. And Bernard is leading l'Institut pour la souveraineté numérique, which I like very much because I think it's really close to my own approach. So please, Bernard, would you present yourself in short?
Hello to you both, and hello to the persons who are looking at us, watching that feed. I'm Bernard Benhamou. I'm head of that Institute of Digital Sovereignty. I wanted to translate it. And I'm also a lecturer at the Paris I-Panthéon Sorbonne University. And I've been involved in digital and regulation for the past 20 years, either as a ministerial delegate for technology in the French government and also as a diplomat at the UN for the World Summit on Information Society, which I've been working on. And my focus is on the regulation, not only about speech, but globally about the internet itself. And currently, my interests are in issues of international relationships, international diplomacy, and strategy about the internet regulation.
Yes, thanks a lot. So all of you have enough reason to look forward to the discussion. Maybe we start. I know that populism is a big word, and there are lots of definitions, and you can write dissertations on how it's defined. So let's not stick too long to the question of definition, but just to have the first steps to say, we can say populism is what we regard as populism. So I want you to ask first, in just a few sentences, how do you, if you say populism, what do you mean by that word? Erika, first, please.
I would say populism is a kind of a hybrid form of politics, which is both a form and also ideology. So I would say there are always at least two elements that are present when we talk about populism. First is, of course, related to the word populus, Latin for common people, which you can also find in democracy. So it's about people, and it's about a self-definition of what the people are and what a people is. And it's basically a definition of people which is unitarian and against diversity, which is exclusive. And the second element, we can, of course, discuss that a lot longer, but it goes from the idea that we are the people, and so we define who is part of the people and who's not. And the second element is the element of the elite. And normally populists are opposing the people against the elite. So that's sort of the basic controversy, which is always dichotomy, which is always there in populism. But you could also see even a third element, which I think is also almost always present, which is the sort of the scapegoat. Those who are the ones who take the blame for everything that goes wrong. And of course, when you not everybody thinks that you have left-wing populism and right-wing populism. That's also a debate. I would say left-wing populism, you could say then the blame is taken by the big capitalists, society and corporations. You can discuss that. In my opinion, that's not really populism, but okay, that's a point to discuss. In right-wing populism, usually it's refugees, people with a background in migration, who are living for less generations than the rest of the population of that area. So they usually take the blame. So populists, at least the kind of populism that we are meeting today in Europe, is very much anti-immigration, as we all know.
Thank you, Erika. Benna, what do you regard as populism? Is that
I almost fully agree with what Erika was saying, and I would also add that indeed there are different kinds of populism, but what makes for me a common feature about it is the means, the methodology which is used to leverage the people will, or some people will in some period of time, to promote certain kind of radical agenda. And usually what we see is that populism can be described as a way to change and to undermine the very core process of democracy. Because at some moment, it's not about democracy anymore. It's about some kind of, I don't want to be too technical about it, but it's some kind of another way to rule the people for their own interest, if we can say, without their consent. Because at first it's about consent, and we will talk about technology and how the internet is in a way helping design those agenda for populists, and in a way it's a way to subvert democracy with new tools and new agenda, which in the end can get rid of democracy. And the internet is a key part of populism today, either on extreme right or extreme left. In a way, it's an echo chamber. It's a way to accelerate, to speed the process and to radicalize people in ways that were existing before, but not so intensely and so quickly. And so, for me, internet doesn't change the populist agenda, but it helps them achieve their goals more easily than it was possible in the past.
Can I ask you something, Werner?
Yes.
So would you say the main feature of populism is that it's anti-democratic in the end?
I'm not the expert you are in that term.
No, I'm just because there's an interesting discussion, I think.
For me, what we are witnessing now for Europe, because we are in a European channel with academics, and we have to notice that, for example, for the first time, 3 of the main powers in the world, meaning United States, China, and Russia, have a common goal of disintegrating the European Union. The first time ever it happened, or the first time it happened so visibly. So for me, yes, I think that what we have designed in Europe as a common destiny of nations, as for some, like me, who is promoting a federal agenda, we are promoting things that could be dangerous, either economically or politically, for those 3 regimes. And in a way, yes, it's the kind of democracy we have built that is under attack. So I guess the long-term agenda, when it's not only grabbing power for power, which is also an agenda for most, it's having enduring power. And enduring power cannot be achieved only by democratic means. For those who are pushing those agendas of populism, they need to be sure that they keep power, and they cannot be sure to keep it if they can be overthrown in a democratic process. So I guess, in a way, it's a way to secure some kind of radical agenda through undermining the democratic process. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I would see that a little bit more complex, but.
In fact, I think what was interesting is that you both were addressing, Erika, you said, you spoke of the exclusiveness of populism, that it you exclude migrants, for example, you exclude the people from the elite, the so-called elite, and but now we're talking of disintegrating forces. So what we try with the colloquium is to see how can we foster the opposite. So if we say populism is excluding and disintegrating, how can we foster resilience and cohesion, and what do you think would be the way also in regard of yes, but we can talk later of the digital point of it, but maybe how can we foster the opposite?
Well, can I say something?
Yes, please, Erika.
That has a lot to do, of course, with your analysis of what populism is, how you think you should counter it or balance it out, or because, in a way, of course, I completely agree that the kind of right-wing populism, radical populism we have now in Europe is a threat to our democratic system and the checks and balances of our system we have. For instance, Thierry Baudet, who is the new hero of populism in the Netherlands, he openly attacks journalists, politicians, scientists, and artists. So to say, all categories of people who are really carrying the basis of democracy by criticizing it, by having a critical mind on things. So I agree there, but I also see that in the same time, a lot of things that are said against populism are reminding me also of the things that were said against Democrats in the 18th century. I mean, the word demos also means people. Just demos in democracy also means people, just like populism has the word people in it. And against democracy, it was said, yeah, those people don't know what they're talking about. They are plebs, in other words, people, plebs. They are not informed enough. It's all very rough and basic. And I say that's for me, it's too easy because I think people also really have a point. We do have a problem with representation in our Western democracy. And we do have a problem with equality and justice in our democracies. Populists are also, we as the democracies as we now have, who gave a lot away of public space to commerce, and these kind of things we have in our parliaments, almost only people who have an academic background, and almost no people from who don't have this high education. In a way, our democracy gave birth to populism themselves. So I think we should not oversee that. So it's very easy to attack them all the time, but I think it's also very important to see where it comes from and what it has to do. It doesn't came out of nothing, the movement of populism. So I think that is very important to say. And still also there is also I think a difference between voters and leaders in the populist movement. Because it's the leaders who define what the people are, so to say. And so they define it themselves, and then they move forward and say who is part of it and who is not. So they shape something that afterwards they say that this is it. So that's, of course, some kind of performative language that is used. So I think these are also the points where we have to start by looking at how we can find a way to answer. And I think there are a lot of very different answers on a practical level of political action, social action, and of course also on the level of philosophical ideas on sovereignty and on what is democracy, how do we define the word people. I mean, in democracy, I think the word people is a counterforce against power that was in too little hands. That's how it started. And I think in populism, the word people is not a counterforce. So that is a very, very big difference where we.
Okay, so
in our country, we also have a very small group who's really actually having the power. And populism is also a protest against that.
So what you say basically is a better democracy would be a good thing against populism.
Yes.
And better institutions of democracy. Bernard, what would your answer be?
I will try to describe the situation we're in at this moment. We have had democracy which has been weakened by some process, some difficulties to grasp all the different interests. You were talking about minorities and the fact that there are scapegoats when we talk about populism. It seems to be a common feature. There is always scapegoats. And when you said that for one, it's capitalism, which is the enemy, and for the other one, it's the identity crisis with the newcomers and the migrants and so on. I guess those two kinds of populism can work together. Look at what happens in Italy at this moment.
Yes.
And so for me, there is no incompatibility. And those, at first, very distant agendas, very distant programs from 5 Stars and from the Liga became one force at this moment, and one populist force. I will not enter into the discussion about illiberal democracies and illiberal, different kind of democracies in Europe, like some say about Hungary and other regimes. But what we can see now is that indeed, in times of crisis, either economic crisis, cultural crisis, and migration crisis, and international crisis, the populist agenda is fed, is nourished by the anxiety of people. And what we see now, with the digital tools that I study a lot these last years, is that they can feed the anxiety. Some would say they can feed the neurosis, the global pathology of people, and that can be a tremendous tool, a tremendous leverage tool to bring out of people those kind of radical agenda they wouldn't dare expressing in times of peace, times of growth, usually. And what we see now is not different from what we have seen in the past. And there is a lot of philosophers and historians who are talking about the similarities between what we are living now in terms of populism and what was in the 30s or in the 20s, whatever. But for me, what is important is that we are facing new kind of crisis. We have new tools that were designed for empowerment, democracy. Look at what was said during the Arab Springs 6 years or 7 years ago. You had someone called Hillary Clinton saying, we are bringing the tools for democracy and freedom in the Arab country with Twitter and Facebook. That what was said at that time. We have had some kind of end of illusion, end of innocence about that. Even if now in Algeria, people are saying that the Facebook movement currently happening in Algeria couldn't have been brought up before Facebook. But basically what we see is now we have the possibility to radicalize people, to use the knowledge we gather about people, to use those tools to help those with a radical agenda achieve their goals faster. And we have now, as democratic citizens, we have now to wonder and to study the way to create some kind of regulation. We met, as you said, Sabria, we met in a conference at the Bundesrat about hate speech. And what was impressive is at that time, it was just a few months ago, at that time, all the great platforms were saying, we are not responsible. We are doing our best. And now, after the Cambridge Analytica scandal, and after the recent declarations by Mark Zuckerberg, they recognize they need that laws and regulation have to be made by states. They know that we are not in a period where all the private entities, the societies, the great platforms, can deal with their own laws. I have a friend who is a famous lawyer in the US, Lawrence Lessig, who has been saying that the code of technology is creating new law. He said code is law and architecture is politics. We need that code to be regulated by the people and not for populist agendas. And we have to consider that now we don't need a regime like in the 30s or in the 40s, where you had to have a large group of military people to grab the power. Now you can have Cambridge Analytica helping decide the election for the largest democracy, if you can say that for the US. That's very important for us. We need to end the sensation or the illusion that those private entities will do the good things. They cannot do that because their interest is not to do that. And at this moment, populist regimes are helped by those tools like never before they have been.
Yes, thanks. I like your term, the end of innocence. And yes, so we have the end of innocence regarding internet and digital space. So my next question to you both would be, how do you see the role of digitalization in the context of populism? So you have both sides. It fosters the wrong and the right, the exclusive tendencies and also the inclusive. Maybe also if you think that there are special approaches in your own country, so in Netherlands and France. Erika, would you?
You mean on the use of the digital?
Yes, how maybe you have an approach to use digital space for good, and or in the opposite, how is your digitalization used by populists, because we know populists are always addressing the oral hate speech in a digital way.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think it's very ambiguous, of course. I agree. I mean, the internet and Facebook and all these social media, they're maybe have been able to contact people, make contacts and do things like in the Arab Spring, but they're also means of control in the same time, and they shape our lives in a certain way and formatting our way of thinking in a certain way. It is. I would say that doesn't change. It makes our world even more complex than it already is, and it makes it go very fast. And I think the speed is also an important topic, because we don't have the time anymore. Not in our communication or in our way of lives. There is no time anymore for reflection. It becomes more and more difficult. So, and that fosters, of course, the easy answers, the quick answers. So yeah, of course that's true. But in the end, I think the point is still what I would say from a theological point of view. Is if you have a fundamentalistic approach to the world or a pluralistic approach. In the end, I think there's a kind of struggle going on between those two worldviews. Of course, our world has become very complex, and the pluralism is there, but there's an enormous resistance, and you can call it fear, but I think there's also a lot of confusion and anger. But I have those too. I can have those anger too. So, but I wouldn't go for populism, you know. Yeah. So it's how you accept pluralism, how you handle pluralism, and that I think that goes for all levels of society, whether it's the digital and technological part of society, the approach to it, or any other realm of our society. But I do think that mostly we take everything that's in one way or another related to technology too much of something that is a fact, like, yeah, this is how it works, we have to deal with it, we have to react to it. And I think that the politicians should be much more aware of the fact that in the end, it's how we shape those systems. And that they are not some natural thing that comes over us and that are developed by scientists and people in the military or whatever. But it is the role of the politicians to give the parameters and to talk about how we want to shape those forms, how we want to communicate. And of course, yeah, when you go from there, you automatically come to an international democracy that is needed to be able to take this task seriously.
Okay, thanks, Bernard.
As a former UN diplomat, I can say that international democracy is almost paradoxical in terms.
Yeah, well,
we can hope, but at this moment, it's the
well, there are a lot of difficulties.
Yeah, difficulties, and the power relationships which exist at the international level. International law is based on power, basically.
But that goes for national power as well.
That's true. That's true in most countries, in the largest part of the world. I agree with you. I agree.
Yeah.
Even in our democracies.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Okay, Bernard, how do you see the role of digitalization? Because that's your.
I don't want to say things that has been discussed so many times about good and bad things. At this moment, I was talking about the end of innocence earlier. We have had two major crises in terms of politics and democracy and internet and digital. We have had Snowden revelations, which has been so underplayed, not analyzed as it was, especially in France. I know that Germany has been very vocal about how important what has been discovered by Edward Snowden was, but we should have had at the European level a global response about that. We didn't have, and that's first. Second, we have more recently, 1 year ago, the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where one company was helping design, and maybe, and I don't want to be too political, maybe with...
go ahead.
Oh, yes, I try. With the help of a foreign country, help design message, which was not so simple, because people were thinking that Cambridge Analytica was saying, okay, vote for Trump. No, it was not that simple. It was aimed at some minorities or some groups, for example, African Americans, and they were, the messages were saying, you are not well represented with Hillary. You should have voted for Bernie Sanders, but he is not in the election, so don't go voting. What the people from Cambridge Analytica was helping was what we can say extinguish the African American vote, which is traditionally Democrat. So, and the same for evangelists and some kind of religious movements which were targeted during the process of the election. So we have now to understand that the internet, we have been a lot of promoters and people were saying internet could be a tool for democracy, has been used and abused by companies for their own interests, by regimes for their own political agenda. And there is an interesting phrase that has been coined recently by Shoshana Zuboff, the professor of Harvard, who was saying we are now in a surveillance capitalism, meaning that we have had a kind of convergence between the technologies of surveillance and the interests of some large companies. And you have two examples of that. The first is the crisis of Cambridge Analytica. And the other side, The other extreme, I could say, is the social credit in China. If people don't know about it, it's a very scary initiative by the Chinese government, which is taking place now and which will be achieved in 2020, which gives a credit, a score to each citizen on 3-digit score. And if you do something that is not in line with what the regime wants you to do, your score is going down. For those who are interested in TV shows, like in Dark Mirror, which is a very interesting episode about that. Basically, if the person has a too bad score, the person cannot travel by plane or by train, cannot access financial tools, cannot have a promotion in terms of a career. So it's a way to design the population and to social engineer, in terms of social engineering, the global population of China like never before. And artificial intelligence and those kind of tools are helping the regime, the communist regime in China, to have a grip on the population like never they had in the past. So yes, we are now facing risks like never ever before because of the lack of regulation, of democratic regulation. And populism and radical movements are helped by those kind of tools like never before. So if we don't understand that at this moment, I'm trying to read the questions.
Yes, I already noted one. Yes, we have there's a Gunnar Sohn, for example, one of our listeners, who said that we need a European public sphere to reduce the nationalist tendencies. And we have been talking in the Bundesrat also on who owns public space and who defines what is visible, who defines, who shapes the discourses. And a lot of problems are not the internet as a tool, but the capitalization, monetization of this tool, as you said, Bernard, is used and abused, of course. I have another point where I want to come back to. Both of you were speaking of anxiety and fear, and you, Erika, said also confusion and anger. And I think that's interesting. We will have also a video colloquium on fear. This is all fear-driven, because that was a real a point that went across our convention last year, where we met in real, everyone, and there was the point. This is all fear-driven came very often, and I want to ask whether is populism something for angry people? Meaning, as a populism, do people relate to populist ideas because they are angry and unhappy? And that would be a question, for example, for you, Erika. Why do religions are not successful in making people happy enough?
Wow, is that the responsibility of religion to make people
No,
happy?
I'm not.
I don't feel like that.
You were saying, you said, I'm angry also, but I wouldn't go for a populist.
Well, the problem with this question is that we're always talking about the fear and the anger of the others. Those who vote for populists because they're afraid or because they're angry. And I think that's too easy. No, we should also confront our own angers and our own fear and be honest about that. And not only think, blaming people for taking the wrong way or something, but also be honest about ourselves in this respect. And what I think is that I cannot say. I don't see that religions are responsible for the happiness of the world. And I mean, religion is such a big. There's so many different religions and perspectives. So I find it difficult to say something in general about that. But what I would say is. If I look at the Bible, what I think this book is about the question what it is to be human, and how we can live as humans in a human way. Not being a god, not being an animal, but being a human. What does it take? And I think this is a question that we really have to face, and it's a very hard question. Because there is a lot of things that are happening around us, like all the technological possibilities in the medical, for instance. How far do you go? Can we have eternal life, or how do we face death in our societies?
Yeah.
There are so many taboos in a society that sort of seems to be without taboos. We have so many distractions. There are so many. I live in a city, Amsterdam, which is where there is a lot of tourism now, and sometimes I say to people who are walking around as if they're in some kind of amusement park, I say, "Hello, this is a city. This is not an amusement park." But maybe in Paris you have those kind of streets as well, where you can be really annoyed when you are a citizen. So, but this perspective of amusement, everything, we all have to be happy, consume, and have a good life. It distracts us from questions that are difficult. It takes time. And for which we need real encounters. And there I come back to the question of also the public space. How do we create spaces where people can really meet and not stay in their own bubble, but learn to really respect also the other, in the sense of somebody who is really different from ourselves. So, and that is something that is difficult, and it confronts you with yourself. So to create those kind of spaces, I would say that can be digital, but it also has to be in real space. I mean, it's more about how you create those spaces, and try to be aware of differences between people. And try to really face the real questions about what it means to be a human today. And those things go slow, and they take time, and they're not so easy.
So you are saying that a resilient society doesn't have to make people happy, but maybe anger competent. So competent to deal with the things that make us human. Bernard.
Yes, I agree, but I also consider that our societies didn't create, and I mean European societies, didn't create common dreams. You were talking about counter narratives for populism. And you cannot counter a very tempting and seducing narrative like populists have, which is purity, which is about conservative identity, and so on. You cannot counter that kind of narrative, that kind of storytelling, without having your own dreams. Dreams are not what politics have to be made of, but dreams are what we are made of. And if we do consider important to have common dreams, like we had in the 60s, for example, with the space exploration, for example, but we have to create those unifying narratives that are completely lacking at this moment.
Okay.
And indeed, we have tools now that are creating gratification. That's what you were talking about. And you have scientists in Google, in Facebook, and in large companies. We are only studying the way to trigger the pleasure centers in the brain. You have neuroscientists, you have psychologists, and many others. We are working there just to be sure that you will be hooked, that you will be addicted in a kind of a new drug. So in front of a drug, you have to create another incentive, another dream. I can use the term doesn't scare me.
Yeah.
That can make people think of the future. You were talking about, you didn't mention the name, but you were talking about life and the possibility of immortality. That's what people call a transhumanism. The possibility for people to live for a much longer lifespan than now. That's a very powerful dream that you can use for people to accept some kind of non-human behavior. Because if we are not linked to our own humanity, even our own mortality, then we become something else. We become machines. That's what some people are saying. We can download our minds in machines that could be eternal, and so on. You can modify the genome of people to create another species that is not human anymore. Yeah. If you remove something which is the ethical sense, or the moral center in the brain, you can have perfect soldiers. You can have inhuman or unhuman people that could foster a new species, a new era. And some philosopher once said that we are in front of a kind of a human fatigue of itself, meaning that people have the sensation that they are bored collectively. They can only have individual pleasures and no common pleasures, common reunion of minds and sensibilities and so in a way that's what we have to recreate. We have to recreate the tools and the ambition, the global ambition, and especially for Europe, because we have, in a way, what all the emerging countries and all the countries in the world have been looking for, meaning some kind of comfort, some kind of richness, some kind of freedom. And in a way, we are acting like if it was not enough. And in a way, we are letting things go as if what we had was not enough. And we are tempted by more radicality, more radical movements, because in a way, they represent something new for us, which is awful, because basically they are very old. They are not only old, but they are something we have been fighting for centuries, against for centuries, and especially in the 20th century. But in a way, people are forgetting and idealizing the past, and idealizing or glamorizing the past in a way that sounds new. And the tools, and I will end with that. What is special about the internet is that you use the term bubble, Erika.
Yeah.
There is that term of info bubble, meaning people are only in contact with people that have the same opinions. Yes. And when you're in contact with people who have the same opinion, the only way you can differentiate yourself is to be more radical, to express more loudly and more radically than others. And that's what Cass Sunstein, the constitutionalist and philosopher, was saying when he said, I believe that in democracy, you don't only have to be in contact with different opinions, you have to be in contact with opinions that are really disturbing for you. Because if you're not disturbed, if you're only comforted in your own information bubble, then you become more and more radical. And strangely, that's what we were talking about with large companies like Google and with YouTube. They are giving people more radical content every day, and their algorithms, their systems are making people addicted to watch more radical videos every time, just because they are submitted to advertising when they look for a long time. And the more they look, the more Google is receiving from their customers, which are not users, which are companies selling advertising. So we have to understand that. And if we don't have the counter narrative and the kind of global discourse to oppose those built by radical systems and transhumanism, which is in a way the ultimate expression of that capitalism gone wrong, meaning drifting toward authoritarian regimes. So that's for me the priority for the times to come.
Well, to link this back to where we started, I think what we need is, for instance, is another idea of what a people is. Like populists relate that back to the past. Like what a people is defined by culture, by language, by history, things like that. And they're kind of a unity. So it's related to the past. But although I think the past is very difficult, very important, but in a different way, I will say something about that after this. But I think we need a concept of people which is fundamentally open and which is about who we want to be, not who we were, but what we are dreaming about. Exactly what you said. Who do we want to be as a European people? Yeah. They always say, yeah, European democracy is not possible because it's not a people. Well, you have so many different peoples in Europe, which is true. But so why not see the whole definition of the word people as something that is related to the future, is related to who we want to be in the future, what we are dreaming of, much more than where we come from. So, and then it has to be, of course, fundamentally open, because, and then it's about the dreams we have, and not about who we were and who we should ever stay forever and ever. So it's not an ontological concept of what people is, but more a relational concept of what the word people signifies. So that, I think that it's an example of how to have a counter story against populism.
I really love how the conversation got to that point, because it's also like connecting all dots, like where we started, and also Bernard, you were saying we need a dream, and you said, Erika, we have to think of who do we want to be, and we had the first video session we had with Ulrike Giraud, Vincent Engel, and Stamen Belchev on the topic visions and European visions and the lack of a mythe rassembleur, something that unites people. And that would, as you said, Erika, you have to leave at 3 o'clock. Maybe that would be also the concluding question when we are talking of what makes societies resistant gegen populism. I would ask you both to maybe share your opinion of with the last video colloquium. They said that Europe as a social project based on justice and solidarity would be a good vision. So I would ask you what you think could be the antidotes against populism, also regarding dreams, and what do we want to be, and what does it take us to be human? Please.
You start.
Just in 30 seconds.
Just the antidotes, nothing more. You said both of you
I do
were saying lots of things.
I would say it's social equality. I would say it's a very important issue in this respect. Of course, the lack of equality and the feeling of people not to have access to the same things than other people is very important, of course. And poverty is a real problem in our societies. So, and there, we know that in the middle class is more and more falling away. There's a small group who is making almost all the money. And also, well, there's a lot to say about the whole social problem. Let's not go into all of that, but I think social equality is something that we definitely have to take very seriously, also on a European level, as difficult as it is. So that's one dot. The next dot, I think, is very classical. It's critical thinking. It's everything that is promoting diversity and critical thinking. So journalism, art, all these kind of science, all the things also that helps us to foster our diversity and who makes us aware of the fact that we're all different and that we will have to deal with that no matter what. I think they're very important, and it's about power and counter power. So we have to really be very aware of, as when it's attacked, we have to defend that. Like in Hungary, it's under attack, like the system of judges and journalism. Those are really the institutions that we really have to defend. So I think and make strong. And the problem is that I think we really need the artists also for the dreaming and the political dreaming as well. And the problem is that our governments have been cutting all those institutions. The journalism is very difficult nowadays. You cannot make your living anymore as a journalist almost. There's no time. You have to do your thing in 10 minutes and instead of half an hour. So it becomes all very amusement, infotainment. So on all these institutions, they are under attack. So the defense of the public forum, I think, is really crucial to this whole thing. And then maybe as a last dot is celebrating who we, the differences, celebrating who we are. For instance, by when we talk about future and dreams, we also have to think about the past, but not in a sense that it is like how it was before was better, but facing the conflicts that are still there in the past. For instance, how can we commemorate on a European level the conflicts of the 20th century, like the two wars that are still very much, there are still deep wounds with that, but also globally speaking, slavery. And we have a big debate on racism and slavery in the Netherlands. And I think it's very important to face those kind of conflicts. And we have to find a language to share those conflicts, like how can we commemorate, for instance, there are official commemorations, of course, on a European level, but are they really helping to find ways to see, like in the First World War, we were all dying, you know, from all the Germans and the English alike. They were all dying, but still, your father shot, or your grandfather shot mine. So there is something in common, and there are also wounds. Mm-hmm. And I think we have to really look at these differences and put them on the table, and find ways to do that. And I think for that we have to really be interested in the history of the other. And for that, we also need to learn the language of the other.
Okay, thank you,
So we
Erika.
cannot do it with English only.
No, not. We'll find a solution for that until the next session, Erika.
Yeah.
Bernard, what makes society resistant? What are your proposals for antidotes against populism?
Indeed, I would agree with Erika on some diagnosis in the fact that inequality or social equality is indeed a goal. Can it be the only goal? No. I think and I believe that we have to create a way to design what the future of our continent, our union, can be, and how we design. What people are saying often in France and in many countries, that they are saying the leaders, the political leaders, are not helping design the future. You know what they want to do in terms of micromanagement of economic crisis and unemployment and so on. You have ideas about what they want for now. They don't say what they want for 25 years ago or 50 years in the future. In a way, we need to create the conditions where people can understand what and where and how their kids and their grandchildren will live in the future. That's why I was surprised that none of us talked about the ecological crisis. And yes, which can be a goal, an important goal for Europe, and not only, strangely, for obvious reasons of preservation and making the planet great again, like the president said. And no, it's also because it can be a way for Europe to develop new industries, and especially digital industries, for dealing with ecological changes. And that could be the kind of rebound, or I don't know the term, but the kind of possibility of stepping back where all the large digital companies are mostly American or Chinese now. We have lost our edge in terms of technology, and mixing our interest, which is something that is not bad, with our convictions, meaning protecting the environment, protecting the planet, limiting the carbon emissions and so on. Yeah. That can be both linked in terms of global hope for not destroying our own system, and also developing our attractivity for the best and the brightest to go in Europe to develop those industries. Because in the past, our forces that we were attractive for people from all over the world to develop new kind of industries. Now we have to do that for our economy, for our political system, and for our long-term survival. And those can be joined in a common, not only narrative, but in a common policy for Europe, which is for now lagging behind in terms of industrial policy, digital policy, and maybe also shaping a political dream for the future.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much for this conversation, both of you. I can say that we go at home with a impulse to dare having dreams and to think of what we want to be, and also celebrating who we are and what makes us human. And I think that's a good direction. And I thank you so much, Bernard Benhamou, Paris, and Erika Meyers, Amsterdam, for having been in the discussion. And I'm really looking forward to going on talking on these topics with both of you and many other people. So thanks a lot and have a nice day. How's the weather in Paris?
It's perfect. It's a shame to be indoor.
I'm jealous. So we leave you outdoor now. And Erika, the weather in Amsterdam?
Not so nice.
Not so. It's like here. It's rainy and dark. But I hope all of us will have
next time in Paris.
Next time. Okay. Welcome to Paris then. Okay.
Take good care.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye.
you.